All right. So, uh, one thing that always gets a lot of buzz in the financial world is when the SEC decides to, file a big lawsuit, especially when it involves someone like Elon Musk.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely. And when it's about a deal as high profile as his whole takeover of Twitter, which is now called X.
Yeah.
Uh,
It certainly grabs everyone's attention, and that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today.
Totally. I mean, as soon as you hear the news that the Securities and Exchange Commission,
Hmm.
the SEC, has filed a lawsuit against Elon Musk about how he bought Twitter back in 2022, a ton of questions come up.
Exactly.
Not just about what they're actually accusing him of, legally, but also the timing of it all. Like, why now?
Yeah, that's a big one. So for this deep dive, what we really want to do is get right to the heart of this SEC lawsuit, you know, really understand exactly what they're saying Musk did wrong, and then we'll, dig into the context of when this lawsuit was actually filed.
Right, right.
And the source we're looking at for this is a transcript from the Ring of Fire on YouTube. And they have a pretty critical take on all this, especially about the timing. So
Absolutely.
by the time we're done, you should have a really solid grasp of what the SEC is claiming, how everything went down according to our source, and, really importantly, the questions that are being raised about why this is all happening now.
Yeah. Think of this as a crash course on this whole financial news story.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. What is the SEC alleging that Elon Musk did wrong here?
So at the core of it, the main allegation is that Elon Musk broke securities laws when he bought Twitter back in 2022.
Okay,
And to be specific, the SEC is claiming that he bought up a huge chunk of Twitter stock without telling the SEC about it when he was legally required to.
right. And our source really emphasizes that Musk waited, a full 11 days before filing that super important disclosure.
Yeah, they do.
Now, for someone who maybe isn't, super familiar with all the ins and outs of securities law, why is that 11-day delay considered such a big deal by the SEC?
Right. So that whole disclosure requirement is not just some random bureaucratic rule.
Right.
It's a fundamental rule that's there to make sure that the market is transparent.
Hmm.
So securities law says that if you buy up more than 5% of a company's shares, you got to file this document with the SEC. Usually it's called a Schedule 13D, and you got to do it within a certain time frame.
Okay.
So this rule exists to stop people from secretly accumulating tons of stock in a company, which could let them manipulate the market or gain an unfair advantage without other investors knowing about their growing influence.
Right.
And this way, everyone can basically see what's going on.
Okay.
Investors and the market as a whole can see potential shifts in ownership and any possible takeover attempts.
Right.
And it lets everyone make informed decisions.
So essentially, it's about making sure everyone has the same information, right? Okay, so if Musk really did wait those 11 days to make that disclosure, what did the SEC say was the consequence of that? What was he able to do in that time?
The SEC argues that this delay allowed Musk to keep buying Twitter stock at what they call an artificially low price.
Okay.
Because he hadn't signaled yet just how much he was interested in the company. The market didn't have the full picture of the potential for increased demand, which usually drives the stock price up.
Right, so other people weren't necessarily buying it up right away.
Exactly.
Okay. And the source we're looking at actually brings up a pretty big number related to this whole thing.
Yeah, they do.
What is the SEC's estimate of how much Musk might have saved by waiting to make that disclosure?
So the SEC lawsuit claims that Elon Musk saved at least $150 million by not disclosing his purchases right away
Wow.
and continuing to buy those shares at that lower price. I mean, that is a lot of money, and it really highlights why someone might be tempted to delay that filing.
Right.
And this kind of thing can really distort things in the market, put other investors at a disadvantage because they might have done things differently if they knew about Musk's growing stake in Twitter.
Absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
interesting that even the source we're looking at, even with their perspective, they still acknowledge how serious these accusations are.
Yeah.
What was their take on whether this kind of delay, if it's proven, if the SEC can prove it constitutes a violation of the law?
The source is pretty clear on this. They flat out say that if the SEC has the evidence to back up these claims, and they seem to believe that the SEC probably does, because otherwise, why would they go through all this trouble with a lawsuit this big? Then yeah, this is totally violation of securities law.
Right.
And they even go so far as to say that Musk should face the consequences.
Okay, so it sounds like there's at least an agreement that if the SEC can back up their claims, a violation happens.
Yeah, I think so.
But this leads us to what our source sees as the biggest problem. The timing of this lawsuit. Like, they spend a lot of time questioning why this is all happening now.
Yeah, it's a big focus for them.
So the lawsuit is announced on a Tuesday, after the markets close.
Yep.
And our source immediately points out that this is all happening pretty close to a change in presidential administration.
Right.
And they specifically mentioned that Donald Trump is going to be sworn in just a couple of days from when it seems like this video was recorded.
Right.
So what connection do they make between this change in who's president and the SEC's decision to file this lawsuit now?
They're pretty straightforward about it, and maybe a little cynical, too. They say, look, with a new president, Donald Trump, about to take over, he's going to appoint a new head of the SEC, right?
Okay.
And knowing that Elon Musk and Trump have been pretty chummy, the source basically speculates that one of the first things this new SEC leader might do is just drop the whole lawsuit.
Wow.
So they see the timing as maybe, politically motivated. Either the current SEC wants to get this done before someone less friendly to Musk takes over, or it's all just a pointless gesture that'll be reversed quickly.
It's a pretty skeptical take, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're basically saying this whole legal thing might be a waste of time because of who's about to be president.
It is, yeah.
So how does our source sound when they're talking about this? Like, what's the tone?
They definitely sound frustrated. Like they can't believe this is happening. They use some strong words saying the timing makes absolutely no sense and calling the lawsuit a waste of everyone's time.
Right.
It's like they feel like the whole thing is pointless because of when they decided to do it.
They even go as far as to suggest that the people who've been working on this case might just be told to drop it as soon as the new administration takes over.
Exactly. It's like they're saying all this work is for nothing.
Right.
And it makes you wonder if maybe there are other reasons why the SEC chose to file now, even if it seems late. Maybe their investigation just reached a point where they had to act, or maybe it's just how their internal processes work, regardless of what's happening politically.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And it's not just the change in administration that they find problematic. They also bring up how much time has passed since the actual violation back in 2022 and the lawsuit being filed now.
Yeah, they really harp on that.
So Twitter was acquired back in 2022, but the lawsuit comes much later. And the source actually mentions the year as being 2025, which really highlights how long it took.
Right, and they use this great analogy. They say it's like the SEC is literally turning in their homework at the last minute, which really gives you that sense of how late this all feels.
It definitely paints a picture like, why now after all this time, especially with a new president about to come in.
Exactly, and that's where their frustration comes from. They see this delay coupled with the change in administration as a huge problem. Like they're saying if the SEC was serious, they should have done this a long time ago.
Okay.
And this makes them think that the lawsuit won't actually do anything.
And so what's their final take on how this will all affect Elon Musk himself?
They don't seem to think it'll do much at all. They end by saying pretty definitively, this isn't going to do anything to him, nothing on not a zip, it's over.
So they really think the timing of this lawsuit will protect Musk.
It sounds like it.
So let's sum this all up. Our deep dive into this using this Ring of Fire transcript shows us that the SEC filed a lawsuit against Elon Musk because they say he violated securities laws by not disclosing his purchases of Twitter stock right away, which they say potentially saved him around $150 million.
Right.
Now, our source acknowledges that these allegations might be true, but they're very critical of the timing. Why now?
Exactly why now, especially with the new president about to take over and considering how long ago the Twitter acquisition actually happened.
Exactly.
They're skeptical that this lawsuit will even be effective.
Yeah, and they think that Musk won't face any consequences because of when this lawsuit was filed. So this really gives us a lot to think about. Given the timeline and all the political stuff our source brings up, what do you think about how complex this whole situation is and how things like politics can play a role in regulatory actions like this?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Like, is this just a coincidence, or could there be something else going on that might influence when these actions are taken?
Yeah.
It really makes you think about all the different factors involved. The SEC is responsible for keeping the market fair and holding people accountable for breaking the rules.
Right.
But then there's also the reality of how long investigations take and the internal procedures they have to follow. And we can't forget about how politics can influence regulatory agencies. It's like this case study in how finance, law, and politics all intersect.
Yeah, it really is.
And it leaves us wondering what will happen and what it all means.
Definitely.
There are so many different perspectives and potential outcomes. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for breaking it all down with me.
Of course, anytime.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And be sure to tune in next time for more fascinating stories from the world of finance and beyond.
See you next time.